Welcome back, everyone, to Season 1, Episode 3 of the Upper Valley Varsity View podcast, Valley News show that takes a look at high school athletics throughout the Upper Valley every other week. I'm your host, Mike Coughlin, and this week we are checking in on the Hanover High baseball and Woodstock High girls tennis teams. First on the show, we have the Bears head coach, John Bagnulo, whose squad is 7-1 to open the 2026 season. Hanover looks primed to be among the squads to make a deep playoff run coming off last season in which they fell in the NHIAA Division II semifinals. In addition to John, we have Wasps head coach Derek Pierce on the show. Woodstock is off to a solid start this season and is looking to make some noise this season after falling in the VPA Division II quarterfinals last year. Now, with introductions out of the way, let's get to the rest of the show. Now joining me on the show is Hanover High baseball coach John Bagnulo. John is amidst his second season with the Bears, and his squad currently sits at 7-1. Hi, John. Thanks for joining the show.
Hey, Mike. How are you?
Good. So, as I mentioned in your introduction, your team has gotten off to a hot start this season. What would you credit the strong start to, and what have been your main takeaways from your squad's first 8 games?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as is the case with most teams, things kind of start and end with your starting pitching, and starting pitching's been phenomenal. High percentage of strikes, a lot of first pitch strikes, good secondary pitches, when they're needed. So, I think our pitching's been by far our strongest point. And, I think there's depth there too, which is always nice. I've had a couple of our juniors step in relief roles and have done a really nice job as well.
Right, and in your first 4 games, you outscored your opponents by a combined tally of 60-4. In the last 4 contests, each is being decided by 2 runs or less. How would you evaluate how your team has played and responded in these recent closer games versus some of these earlier blowouts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always, think it's important to look at a season in portions like that, breaking it down. And I think that when we played Bedford, they had good pitching. It was probably the best pitching we'd seen. So that may be somewhat of an anomaly. In the other 2 games, I think we did have some pretty, we barreled up some balls, had some really deep flies, both, pull side and opposite. So I felt like we were actually hitting the ball fairly well, hit it at guys. And so I think that was part of it. I think that's part of these last 3. The balls didn't fall necessarily, but we did come up with some good quality at bats when it was important. But yeah, definitely 2 of those 3 games, I would say, were very, very different than what we experienced in the first 4.
Right, and when we had talked earlier this season or just before it, you had mentioned to me wanting to play better defensively than you had last season, and that being a key to being able to play with anyone in your league. How would you say the team has fared defensively so far?
Well, I think it's still a work in progress. I think with some aspects of our defense, I think we're much better than we were when we started the season, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Right, and I know you just mentioned kind of still a lot of work to do on defense, but even with this early success, what are some of the things you're emphasizing with your team to try and keep, the strong start, this momentum from it going, and to try and carry that into, potentially a long postseason run?
Yeah, I think it's important to, be in the present. I don't want them to look, at the start to the season here and let that change any part of the process. I want to make sure that, each one of our guys is continuing to make the effort and strive to be better with all aspects of the game. Base running including, that was a big problem last year. It was right there with some of our defensive woes. And this year we spent more time on base running. I am really encouraged by better base running here in these last few games. So, every aspect of the game, I want to make sure guys aren't they're not thinking that they've arrived, and I don't see that, which is good. So really just trying to be where your feet are. We emphasize that, stay in the process. Don't get too attached to the outcomes, better, but for better or worse, the outcomes sometimes are beyond our control. I think that's one thing that baseball really teaches guys early on. And I'm just reminding them of that we got a long ways to go to reach our goal, our ultimate goal. And it's going to take, everybody's collaborative effort and all their own individual efforts to be, the best players they can be. So that's a constant reminder every day when we meet, is like, let's make sure we're doing everything we can to make the gains, to be better at the different aspects of the game that we know we need work in. And I think by and large that, guys are hearing that, and they've embraced that fully.
Right, and then finally, I mentioned it at the top of the interview, you're now in your second season heading up the Bears. How have you enjoyed, the position so far, and has it lived up to any expectations you might have had when you first took the job?
Yeah, I've enjoyed it for really a long list of reasons. I think this current group of varsity players, there's 8 seniors, and they've played a lot of baseball in comparison to other places I've coached, and so I think there's a certain level of maturity as well that this current varsity roster possesses that is obviously any coach would appreciate. They're a real joy to work with. So I think it's exceeded my expectations in terms of that level of maturity that they possess. I think that Hanover has a pretty decent baseball culture in comparison to, many areas of New England and many areas of New Hampshire. So, I really like that. I'm doing everything I can to try to keep that culture, to grow that culture by offering, a couple camps in the summer for different age groups, and, trying to really promote kids at a younger age, staying on that baseball path, because, as we all know, the number of kids that start playing baseball at age, let's say 9 or 10, and then the numbers that you end up with by the time they're in high school, it's a real significant drop off, probably more than with any other sport. And so I think that's always our greatest challenge. And Hanover has a great baseball culture already. So again, that's been a great part of this coaching is seeing that, there's a foundation there to keep players playing baseball into their high school years.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining the show, John. I appreciate it, and I wish you and your team luck the rest of the season.
Hey, thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity. Take care.
Here with me on the show now is Woodstock High girls tennis coach Derek Pierce. Derek is in his second season leading the Wasps, and his team is currently 2-1. Hi, Derek. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So your squad opened the season with 2 straight wins over Bellows Falls and Brattleboro, then fell to Mount Anthony in their latest matchup. What have been your main takeaways from your team's performance thus far?
What's been great is that we have strong first singles all the way through 5th. We have all returning players there, so we're pretty strong. And what was nice this season, we had about 22 athletes come out for the team. I'm carrying 12, so a couple extra for the varsity. But what's been great as well is that we have a structured JV program. So all the younger athletes are getting the opportunity to play through practice and so forth.
Right, and you alluded to one of the questions I wanted to ask, before, when we talked this season, you said, more than 20 athletes have, come out for tennis this season, and I know you mentioned it, having a more organized JV squad. I just wanted to know, what you think, having a more organized JV squad, can do for the tennis program at the high school as a whole and, for the future of it.
Yeah, when you look around the division of the league and so forth, you see other schools like Hartford and MSJ not able to field a team, basically. And so I felt fortunate that when I saw the interest, certainly this year, and having that structured JV now these athletes can actually get on the courts at least 3 times a week right now and develop their skills and so forth. And there's a pretty deep bench as far as the coaching. We've had some volunteers that wanted to do that, other than just the regular JV coach as well. So that'll lend itself to, when you have freshmen, sophomore, and some of these athletes are coming out as a junior and senior just wanting to play tennis and so forth. And some of the that have played other sports, you can see that they can get up to speed very quickly. But we didn't have that in the years past. We had JV, but it was kind of hit and miss. And I noticed other schools have that issue as well. When we did play Mount Anthony, and they'll be coming to us tomorrow at 11 o'clock, but when we did play them last week, they had probably 20 plus, because they're JV, they've got a deep bench there too. So that was good to see that some other schools have some attendance with that.
Right, and who are some individual players in singles or pairs and doubles that have stood out to you with their play so far this season? And are there some other athletes you're hoping that could potentially make an impact as the season progresses?
Yeah, we've gone through let's say the first month and a couple weeks of practice and a couple matches, and now we're able to see how the athletes, certainly in the doubles, play together, and we're trying to make those matches and so forth. I'll tell you, I feel good that this year, you have this varsity, girls tennis, and it's competitive, high school tennis, and yet I still wanted to see if I could at least get these athletes, everyone, to play in a match. And I feel good that we've been able to do that at this point, only with 3 matches played. So now focusing on the next month here to see, okay, who's belongs in which position and so forth. As I said, and I'll just Mia Zillan in our first singles typically, my daughter Jess Pierce in the second, third, Kiara Winnower Stein, also a singles player that's been rotating in a couple of those different singles positions. Mackenzie Graham, Ava Zillan. And so these are the singles that they're very strong and solid. And it's up to, myself and our other coach looking at it weekly now to say, what position in the lineup makes most sense. And then our doubles, we have Katie Kuhn, we have Adele Danielchak, Caroline Adams, Maggie Knox. I'm happy to give you all the names because Jada and Mattia Gibson, just a bunch of good athletes. Some of those latter names that I've just given you, some of them are just new to the sport this year, but it's nice to see after a month and a couple of weeks that how quickly they're getting up to speed and so forth.
Right, and you kind of alluded to it, but I know before the season when we had spoken, you had mentioned that you thought you guys would be solid in singles, but maybe needing to get squads up to speed in doubles this season. 3 games in, how do you feel that is going?
Yeah, I feel good. We had a couple athletes out in this past week when we played Mount Anthony. And that was one of our only losses at this point. We'll have them, as I said, tomorrow. But it'll be nice because 2 of the athletes that will be in our 1 through 5 singles will be in the mix again. And so that'll be a good change there. And with the doubles, now we can take 2 of our more seasoned girls that had stepped up to play singles because these two athletes were not here, they'll go back to doubles now and be able to support. I'll split them basically, and they'll be able to support two of the newer players. So I feel it will be certainly much stronger tomorrow doing that. And then looking out, it looks like we have Rutland a couple times. We missed Rutland last year because of all the rain last spring. And it looks like we'll have BBA obviously 2 times coming up. And I'm hearing good things about those teams as well, so they should be pretty competitive matches. Bellows Falls that we had a couple nights ago, we're going to get them again on the 18th because we had a rain out, basically. We started the match play, and probably within the first 20 minutes, we had 3 matches going, and we had to stop. So Dave Chesley and his crew will come up on the 18th again to finish that.
Okay, and then, finally, Woodstock girls tennis has had a lot of success in its history with 11 state titles, the most recent of which came in 2019. Kind of looking ahead a little bit, what do you think it will take from your squad to, potentially make any sort of push in the playoffs?
Well, I think, certainly this season, it's an interesting season, as I said, Hartford not in the mix, MSJ not in the mix, and so forth. So it'll be interesting to see, even within the division, how that settles out, and then looking at the northern schools that you typically get in that, in the playoffs and so forth. I do think, this year, my co-captains, Kiara Winterstein and Mia Zillan, they'll be graduating this year. And one of the newer athletes, Maggie Knox, is a senior as well, and she'll graduate. But because of the depth in that JV program, it'll be interesting to see over the next year or two where the spots can be filled and so forth. So I'm optimistic with that and so forth. It's and I do know there's some younger players who have been playing 7th grade, 8th grade that'll come into the high school, and it'll bode well to fill some of those spots. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining the show, Derek. I really appreciate it, and I wish you and your team luck the rest of the way.
Awesome. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
And that was Season 1, Episode 3 of the Upper Valley Varsity View podcast. As always, thanks for listening. Stay tuned till next week for the newest episode of the Inside the Woods podcast. Till then, enjoy the rest of your week.